Hughes. This week, it is my absolute pleasure to be joined by Peter Harris. Peter is the Managing Director of TAB, the alternative board in Staffordshire. He's got a wealth of experience in a number of large companies, many of whom are household names and you might well have heard of. And he brings that now to work with business owners and business professionals, SMEs typically within the Staffordshire region, helping them on their growth journey by giving them facilities that they wouldn't necessarily have access to as standalone businesses. So Peter, welcome to Friday Live. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here. I've just done a potted history of you, which probably does you no justice whatsoever. Would you like to just give us like 60 to 90 seconds of who you are in your own words? Because you'll do a far better job than I did.
Yeah, sure, Matthew. So as you suggested, I had a fairly lengthy career in the corporate world. Worked for most recently BT, but I'd worked for a engineering company called RMI PLC, Virgin Media were in my background, Phones for You Group, which many of those in Staffordshire may know and love or otherwise. And did a lot of things that actually, to the piece you said about what the alternative board is, that really built towards that. And actually, I find myself quite privileged in some ways in that I did a lot of really good stuff through all of that around coaching, developing within groups approaches to strategic problems, risk management problems, particularly because that was a big part of my background, that governance and compliance piece, holding people to account in those sort of group forums, and making sure that good things were happening coming out of those conversations. And ultimately, when you talked about the alternative board and why it's alternative, it's providing an alternative way for SMEs to get access to that kind of environment by sharing with other SME owners the kind of challenges and problems that each of them face in their own businesses, and giving the opportunity to talk about those opportunities to solve those challenges that they might have, and to have a group of people holding them accountable. So it's almost why have a coach when you could have a TAB board as well. You've got several other people sitting around the table giving you the ideas and giving you that support and accountability that you're not always going to get as an SME owning your own business. You mentioned I was the managing director. I'm also the owner of TAB in North Staffordshire. So I'm facing some of those issues myself. We sort of live our own values, and we actually have peer boards of TAB business owners and facilitators from around the country who do exactly that, and for exactly the same reasons. So, there you go, Matthew.
I like it, and yes, that sounds very familiar. In Sandler, we have a phrase: "We eat our own dog food." So we do very much the same sort of thing. So I that resonates a lot. Talking of things that resonate, I mean, you and I have both kind of been there in terms of the larger corporate businesses, and so we've both experienced board tables throughout our careers. Those typically large, highly polished oak tables with lots of people with big personalities, usually fairly big paychecks as well, although that doesn't always translate into the SME world, but usually fairly large egos, shall we say, all sitting around a board table. I mean, why would anybody want to willingly put themselves through that kind of torture?
I think for me, it's about once you get into it, and a lot of the feedback we get on our boards is it's being able to share some of the burden with somebody else. It's that opportunity to have somebody who is invested in a business of their own, not invested in yours, giving you an opinion and a voice that challenges your own in a way that maybe your team, your friends, and even potentially professional advisors don't do. And I think it brings exactly that sort of thing that you get from a board, those board tables you and I had sat around, of a group of people with differing experiences, providing a level of challenge or a level of confirmation. I mean, one recent board was really interesting, actually, because somebody bought an issue believing they were doing the wrong thing, and everybody said, no, you're not, you're doing exactly the right thing. And sometimes it's just giving you that confidence. So, it surprises me quite often. People say, well, 4 hours went by really quickly, and it takes a lot out of you because you're putting a lot into it and you're gaining a lot from it. And the other piece for me, which always chimes and resonates for me, is you come with an issue that you're talking about around your own business. But actually, and we had it on a taster board recently, everybody goes, well, actually, the thing that was really interesting to me was what came out of somebody else's issue. Because that's reminded me of something I'm not doing or need to do better and get on top of. To the extent in that taster board, actually, somebody walked out of it, and a day later said to me in a conversation, "I've done something about it. I've sorted it, and it's making a it's already making a difference." So for me, that's why you put yourself through it, and we try and have a lot of fun as well. So, but Matthew, I guess for me, you sat around that board table as well. Why would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've nailed it. To be fair, you know, it could be torture, and certainly, I mean, you used the phrase that it takes a lot out of you. You know, without a doubt, you know, it does take a lot out of you. But then anything where you're putting a lot in does. You know, and if you are going to get some genuine business benefit out of spending, you know, X amount of time on something, then, you know, you're going to have to put some cognitive and behavioral effort in, you know, and we always talk about spending time. I prefer to think of investing it because I want to get a return. You know, time's my one non-renewable resource. I'd quite like to get something for it, you know. So, you know, if I'm going to spend 4 hours around a board table, as I have done, as you rightly point out, on many occasions and longer, then it's really important that actually what you're getting is a diverse range of opinions. And I think you articulated it really well. The ability to kind of see your own situation reflected in apparently unrelated areas. So somebody else brings something to the table and you think, actually, you know what? That really resonates with me. That's actually allowed me to think about my own issue through a new lens, see it through new eyes. And so, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that speaks to something else, though. I mean, I've sat around good tables and I've sat around bad board tables. And for me, the weaker ones have all been where I look around the room and it's basically a bunch of people who all look like clones of one another. They all look the same. They've all come from very similar school backgrounds, very similar, should we say, socioeconomic backgrounds. They're largely white, male, grey hair. I realize, you know, I'm throwing stones in a glass house here, but, you know, ultimately there's an awful lot of very similar looking folk around that table, and it doesn't really give you that range, that diversity of opinion that actually is where the best board tables really generate their results. Has that been your experience within the TAB sphere as well?
Inevitably, I'm going to say no, Matthew. Of course, we've got diversity, but I think it's a truism because I've got 2 boards running at the moment. I look at across those 2 boards, and I mean, there's 11 members at the moment that I have. 6, 7 of them are female. So to that diversity piece, we've probably got 10 different categories or industries represented. We've got vast variety from one I'd say is a healthcare provider, but more to our 4-legged friends than anything else, without giving too much away. We've got web service providers. We've got recruitment consultants. So there's a real variety. Talking at the moment to a company that's involved in the mobile industry. Back to my background in some ways. So for me, no, it doesn't. And also there's a diversity of age range. There is a diversity of background, because inevitably not every business owner has done what you and I have done in terms of that corporate career. Some of them have taken that brave move of setting up on their own, and they've always been out there doing it. Some of them do have that corporate background, but they may have specialized in a particular area. And that level of specialization they bring to that board or something that, again, you won't necessarily find elsewhere. What for me you are getting, exactly as you say, is that diversity of view, that diversity of background and experience. And definitely what you aren't getting, and no offense intended to your description, you aren't getting just, you know, fellas that look like you and I, to be fair to you, in that it is me too from that perspective. So it is all about getting just that real diversity of perspective, view, challenge, because what you also get is different personalities. You use disc reports in terms of what you do. We use them for TAB, and almost, you know, one of the reasons for doing that is to help people understand who it is they're talking to, but also to an extent, when we're first looking at them, to make sure we are getting some of that diversity built in, because those different ways of thinking and behaving are also a big part of what comes into that board. So no, there you go. I gave you the longer answer in the end, but I'll give you
no,
nine.
perfect. That was exactly what I was expecting in some respects. It's actually you've got a degree of flexibility that maybe some companies have failed to build into their own architecture when they've actually been out recruiting, because very often people go out there when they start recruiting, if they've never been trained how to hire people properly, they tend to recruit in their own image, only weaker, which means that what you end up with is actually a series of clones who are ever diminishing in terms of their quality, which is unfortunately a bit of a fast track to sort of undermining your own business. But I've seen it many times in organizations, I'm sure you have as well. I guess the great thing about Tab is what you've got is a lot of heavy hitters, all from different backgrounds, all with very different kind of disparate views on things, different age ranges, different genders, different ethnicity, and really having that diversity of opinion allows you to really see the world through different lenses. And that's certainly my experience of really good boards. They've always been like that. They've been quite, constructive challenge has been there because they've got different worldviews, which is really important. You mentioned DISC reports. Now, I'm conscious that not everybody who's watching or listening in might actually know what DISC assessments actually are. Do you want to give a quick high-level overview of what DISC actually is?
Yeah, DISC is a survey, and I mean, some people will say it's like a behavioural survey, and at a level it is, but it's asking you questions mainly about how you interact with other people. So it's all about assessing how you're going to interact with them. And actually what it produces is a report that tells you something about where you are in a particular space. So it's called DISC because D is dominant. Matthew's going to remind me about the letters. But ultimately, in those I is all about people who are very gregarious. They're very much all about the conversation. S is people who are sort of more beginning to be a bit more detail focused, but they are a little bit more standbackish. They're a little bit more easygoing. C is the detailed person, and as I said, D. Sorry, that's me, and that's some people who can be a little bit dominant at times. So I'm trying to avoid that right now, Matthew. So.
That's quite all right. No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, as you and I both know our own DISC profiles, D, as you rightly say, is dominant. I is an influencer. S is steady writer, and C is compliant or conscientious. And really, what it is, it's about the energy that it takes somebody to do something or to communicate in a particular way. So if their natural focus is to be very forward motion, very much a task orientated, I just want to get stuff done, then yeah, they tend to be quite dominant in their way of thinking, but they also tend to make decisions rather too quickly at times. Maybe they're a little bit, act in haste, repent at leisure. That's probably absolutely a phrase that's invented for your high Ds.
I think to what I was saying about it in terms of a board contact, it's almost those different ways of looking at things. So, one of the ways in which you think about presenting a DISC report is how active or reflective am I? If I'm more active, then that can be a really good thing. So neither of those things is a bad thing. But actually over on the other side, looking at a different way, it's people who are task focused and people who are people focused, and whether they think about those things first. So a little bit of diversity as well in terms of those things that are there from that DISC report or that DISC profiling. It really helps again in terms of just getting people who are thinking about things in a different way, coming at it from a different angle. Obviously, it makes it a little bit tricky to make sure that what you get is a cohesive group, because what you don't want is everybody going off in completely different directions and tangents. So we put a lot of effort into the way in which we structure it, and there is a strong structure there. It's interesting to see quite a few people who've been on taster boards who are on boards already with me, making sort of some comments around that and that diversity. So good to see.
Yeah, and I must admit, I use it in a very similar way myself when I'm building cohorts for training. It's good to have a diverse range of people within the cohort, because you'll find that there can be some healthy tensions. So for example, if you have got a high D who does want to sort of move forward at all costs and will leap in before he or she looks, then actually it's good to balance that up with maybe a high C who's going to be much more detail orientated. Their tendency is to measure twice and cut once, and maybe even forget to even do the cut because they're so pleased with the measurement. So they're doing all of this kind of, let me just dot every I and cross every T. So they end up getting stuck in analysis paralysis. So the tension there is obvious, but it's also a very positive one, because if you've got a D and a C working together in harmony and in lockstep, actually the C kind of pulls the D back and the D pulls the C forward, which is, where real healthy forward momentum without unintended consequences can happen. And that's what a great dynamic looks like, right? So I love that. I love the fact it's not just taking, throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping some sticks. That's a great move.
Yeah.
So, I mean, give me a sense then of what's the sorts of business challenges that typically SMEs who would seek out this kind of an environment to help them to grow. What's the sorts of things that they would actually be looking to help with?
It can be hugely varied, Matthew. I mean, I think about things we've had recently. We've had product questions. So I'm thinking of launching a new product. What do I think about it? To the extent that we actually got that particular member to circulate around the rest of the board some stuff about what the product was and how it would work, so they could get some feedback. So stuff happens outside of the board as well. But we've had people-related issues, as you can imagine, during the last year. People engagement, mental health issues coming forward, but it can be cash flow issues, issues about how to develop and improve margin, how to get cost out. So it's hugely varied. Quite often, particularly at the beginning, actually, interestingly, people come with marketing questions, LinkedIn being a big one, but equally, depending on the nature of the business, should I be using Facebook? Should I be using Insta? What does a marketing strategy look like? We've had, and again, we won't just stop in terms of answering the question. We've had people bring a marketing strategy to get feedback, to get perspective, to get different views, to get the benefit of exactly what we were talking about a moment ago in terms of that diversity and challenge. And so you can imagine that actually what you're getting is, by throwing all of those things into the mix and all those different ideas, is lots of new ideas. So it's it's powerful stuff.
Absolutely fantastic. No, that's exactly the kind of conversation that, when you're first starting out in business, having, I suppose a safe environment in which you can talk to other people who've got a different range of views on these things can be incredibly useful. I'm just going to go to the chat for a second, because we have got quite a lot of people commenting in the chat. I'm just going to have a quick scroll down to make sure that we're not missing out on anything. We've got a few sort of friends of the show here, as they say. You've got Bruce Ridley, nice to see you there. We've got Adrian Hyde. Adrian's saying that he sat in on one of your taster sessions, Peter, and found it very, very eye-opening. Tracy Hollins, who we both know, is also saying good afternoon. We've got Andrew Heward saying that he found his taster board very useful as well. So a lot of love for your taster boards here. I mean, when is your next taster board, and how long do they typically last?
Next one's going to be the 4th of June. We start bright and early, 8 a.m. Either 8 a.m. or 8:30, but that one's 8 a.m. And usually those last a couple of hours. So we start it early so people can continue their day after they've had the joy of it. And as I say, I mentioned earlier somebody who left and implemented something pretty rapidly afterwards, and he's on, so I'm going to give him the credit for that, because it was really impressive. It was Andrew Heward, and he left to continue his day and get on with actually changing something pretty much straight away in his business, which was fantastic. Some really great people who are on there sort of mentioning that they've enjoyed it and found it useful. And the great thing is, you come on a taster board, there's no cost to it. It's an opportunity to find out whether it's for you. And I think it's worth saying, Matthew, it's not for everybody, because some of the things you've said about the environment can be difficult for some people. But it's a good chance to come and see and to test out something that you've got on your mind at that moment. What almost always surprises me on the taster boards, actually, is they're just as incisive quite often as the full boards, where people have had that opportunity to get to know each other a little more, because people get drawn into it, and I think the thing they're often surprised by is they're saying, I'm not sure that actually this will be interesting to me. I'm not sure that the other issues will be that fascinating. And as I say, more often than not, they leave going, actually, that was the piece that was really interesting, was the other guy's question. Because actually they gain a lot from that too. And I think that for me is where the power comes from of it. It's just that diversity, that stopping to think, the challenge, are you sure about that? Even in a taster board.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the certainly when I came on one, that's exactly my experience was, actually people were really quite open to having, quite sensitive discussions, but because it's set up in such a way that it does feel like it's a safe place to do that, and generally speaking, you've got disparate people in there, which means you haven't got competition in the room. It feels like it's a genuinely safe thing to do, and actually that's echoed by some of the people in the chat here. Tracy's saying that the boards have made a massive difference to her and her business. Adrian Hyde says, you don't know what you don't know. So often we don't realize we need help until it's too late. That's where what Peter does pays dividends. You owe all these people a bit of a drink afterwards. I tell you, you've got a bit of a fan club going on here, which is nice. Good stuff. So, I mean, looking at sort of drilling into some of the people challenges that have happened over the course of the last year, and this is something which has been coming up a lot in my own world, certainly as we've been dealing with some of our clients as well. It feels like there's a lot of questions. How do we go back to the office? Do we go back to the office? What does good hiring look like? How do you sensitively manage some of the more, I suppose, awkward business challenges that might mean that some people need to get let go during the course of this kind of whole situation? How do you manage furlough? How do you manage people's mental health? All of those sorts of things that come up, and mental health being a big one that you mentioned there. It is Mental Health Awareness Week after all. What's the sorts of, without obviously breaching any confidences, what's the sorts of challenges that have come up, and what's the sorts of innovative suggestions that have come out?
I think the kind of challenges that have come out have been around individuals who've been struggling from within the business, either the owner themselves, or they've got a significant member of staff who is struggling, or they've got multiple members of staff who are struggling. Team morale has dropped off. Everybody's tired, particularly in businesses that have been particularly impacted from the point of view of actually it's increased what they're doing. Either from they're just doing more business, or actually they've just had to implement more procedure and more difficult things. I think of one member particularly who had that sort of issue where, the nature of their business was such that they had to check customers out before they came in. They had to keep customers at a particular distance. So it slowed the whole process down, made it more difficult, put more pressure on the staff. And I think a lot of the conversations have been therefore thinking about, right, okay, how do we make sure that people feel valued? So there's been some really good stuff around that. Around Christmas time, there were some great ideas as to different things to do about parties for Christmas and New Year, how to show people that you cared in other ways, in terms of, are there gifts we can send people? Are there other things that we can do from that point of view? Where it was the specific case of an individual was one of the most interesting ones, because that was kind of, I'm a little bit at my wit's end as to how I get this individual to slow down and actually realize they don't need to do as much as they're doing, and to back away a little bit and to put more trust in their team. And ultimately, the answer that kind of came forward was, well, look, have the conversation, sit down, do it like a coaching session. Talk to somebody who's got some experience of that kind of thing, and get the person to recognize and do some self-realization of, actually, they're probably causing some problems for the team that they're so passionate about, because they're almost being too controlling, and also that they're doing themselves some damage. And so that was a really great one, I think, in just improving the thoughtfulness about that. And then another one was sort of part of the issue for one particular business had been, we had to take a bit more control of some things. And almost now at the other end, it's kind of, we need to go back to being the fairly friendly, relaxed business that we were previously as we start to come out. How do we do that? And the big suggestion there was very much about, getting people together as much as you can at the moment to have the conversation and say, look, let's remember who we were before all of this. And that, in one specific instance, it was around people taking a fairly hard line about when people could take breaks. There have been some good reasons for that, but things were moving on. And it was kind of, we're about inclusion, we're about involvement, we're about engaged employees. So let's remember that and ease it back a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that is a nice snapshot of a number of challenges, which I think I'm sure some of those resonate with quite a few people who might be listening in on this. If you've got staff, then you employ a team, then during the course of the last year or so, then you've probably been faced with challenges that you've never been faced with before. And certainly the organizations that I've seen that have best weathered the storm, if that's even the right phrase, certainly the ones who've been set up to be able to, I suppose, move fairly sort of smoothly through these choppy waters, have been the ones who've been able to draw on a number of different kind of angles, which of course they've never had to consider before, but at least they've got that innovation, they've got those different approaches, and they're applying emotional intelligence now, but they're doing so at a distance, which is
it's interesting actually, Matthew. Kind of, you've brought two things together for me in terms of when I was first thinking about doing this. You asked me the question about what sort of issues come up, and one thing I left out of the list in many ways was some really personal issues actually. I've never seen that necessarily on a taster board. That does come more when you've got an actual board. But actually personal issues then begin to impact into the business. And I mean, the most interesting piece I saw that, I attended somebody else's board as a visitor when I was first thinking about doing this. And got into a bit of a conversation. It was just pre-Christmas, so there was a bit of banter because the guy that was running it looked like he was preparing to be Santa for the year. If he's on and listening, I hope he'll forgive me. And but all of a sudden the conversation went in a different direction as to, essentially the question was asked, well, you know, how's the dickhead? You know, I'm there amongst a group of people I've not met before, and it's like, well, that's a little weird. And somebody obviously saw my slight consternation and discomfort and said, oh, don't worry about it, Peter. It's fairly normal. It's just that, you know, chap's got a personal issue in terms of daughter's boyfriend is causing a few issues. But I think for me, what it kind of said was that the depth of this in many ways does become about those things. And sometimes in the boards, it has moved on to be not just a business issue, but actually a personal issue that is actually impinging on the business. And I think, you know, bringing a bit of summation to some of this, why would you spend 4 hours? Because you're not going to get a group of people independently advising you about something like that almost anywhere else. Because that's really unusual. And you know, there's been a couple of things recently of that nature, and they've been some of the best board conversations and provided some of the best support that the people who bought them have had out of their board. They've had great support around other things, but actually in those moments when and same colleague, Father Christmas, sort of said to me in the last couple of days, it's kind of forming, norming, and storming. You form the board, you get into a normality, and then you start storming. You're storming at the point when people feel confident and comfortable to bring that stuff it may occasionally be purely personal, but actually where it's personal, it's an impinging on what they're trying to achieve with their business.
And that really does resonate, because I've never yet met a human being who can genuinely transition totally smoothly from, you know, something that is hitting them emotionally where they live, as it were, and have it not in some measure kind of impact, if not on their performance, at least on their concentration, their focus, or their prioritization during the rest of the day. And certainly, you know, even if it just spills across into mood to some measure, then, you know, people feel it. So yeah, no, it makes huge sense to be able to have a forum that helps you to deal with all of those things, particularly to the extent that they impinge upon your working day. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Believe it or not, we're actually coming up to the end of the half an hour already. So I mean, usually at this point, I like to just ask how people can get in touch with you. So we've already mentioned the fact you do taster boards relatively regularly. How can people actually get in touch with you so that they could even kind of maybe sign up and attend one of these things?
They can find all my contact details actually on LinkedIn, on my profile. But my email address is pharris@thealternativeboard.co.uk. They're very welcome to call me on my mobile, which is 07931 760 460. And of course, being on LinkedIn, they're very welcome to message me on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely fantastic. I love it. Absolutely brilliant. So, Peter, thanks again for your time today. I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have done. As always, a very fascinating conversation. And as always, we could go on for an awful lot longer. If anybody is interested in knowing a little bit more about this kind of thing, I mean, firstly, I would urge you to go and get onto one of Peter's taster boards. They genuinely are extremely useful and very, very insightful. And if you've never sat around a board table before, then this is what good looks like. If you then ever sit around a real board table, you know what I mean, in a corporate environment, you may be a little disappointed by the comparison with Tab, which is usually far superior in my experience. So there you go. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, my name is Matthew-Hughes. And don't worry, you don't have to type out that whole name. If you want to send me an email, just send it to my initials, mdh@sandler.com. Just like Peter, you can get a hold of me on a mobile as well, 07715 269 724. You can get a hold of me on LinkedIn. You can, do smoke signals. I respond to most things. So there you go. It's been a fantastic session, Peter. Thanks again for your time. Next week, I'm going to be joined by Aaron Chetwin, who runs a branch of Insight 6 over on Merseyside. So we'll be hearing an awful lot about customer experience and the customer journey and how to get fantastic customer reviews that reflect your quality of brand. But until next week, have a fantastic week, everybody. Whatever you're doing this weekend, do it safely, and I'll see you in 7 days' time. Thank you very much indeed. See you all.
Thanks, Matthew.